he's going to have different expectations placed on him when he grows up than a girl is, right? He's going to carry different weights. Society is going to preach different messages to him. There's a huge message about toxic masculinity, but I have never heard anyone talk about toxic femininity. That's not a message that girls really have to come up against, because we kind of believe and we see the goodness of women in the feminine spirit. But with men, because their aggression and their ability to do that can be really harmful, we're like, oh, we've got to take that, figure out a way to crush it. So we're going to call it toxic, instead of figuring out how do we take what that is inside of boys, that's their identity, and channel it towards something positive.
Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, the place where high-performing men are empowered to reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness while enhancing their career success. You see, in a world full of noise, burnout, and mediocrity, we believe what's missing is courageous and compassionate leadership in the home, because when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. You see, this isn't just a podcast. It's a movement of men who refuse to settle for less in our families, our focus, and our future. We are curse breakers and we are legacy makers. And I'm your host, Mitchell Osmond, and I'm honored that you have chosen to invest your most valuable asset, which is your time with me today. Now let's get into it. Well, listen, y'all. Today is going to be a great episode. If you are a man and you have children, you're in for it. But before we jump in, I want to invite you to an incredible opportunity that only a few men are going to get to be a part of, okay? And maybe you're listening right now and you've built a career you're proud of. Maybe you're respected at work, admired by your peers, and you've achieved that level of success that men only dream of. But at home, it's a different story. If your wife feels distant, maybe the spark is barely there, and the conversations are either surface level or maybe they're just tense. You've tried date nights, you've tried gifts, and you've even tried staying quiet to avoid conflict, and somehow it backfires. Nothing seems to work. But I want you to imagine this with me. I want you to imagine walking through the door and seeing your wife light up when she sees you. Imagine her respecting, admiring, and desiring you again. Imagine being the hero to your kids, not just the guy who pays the bills. Imagine leading your family with the same confidence and clarity that you bring to your business. Now, this isn't just wishful thinking, all right? It's a choice. And on November 3rd, 2025, I am hosting the Date Your Wife Challenge, okay? And over 5 days, from Monday to Friday, you will spend 1 hour with me and a community of other like-minded men. And you are going to plan unforgettable date nights that reignite the spark. You're going to learn how to meet your wife's 3 deepest emotional needs to deepen connection. You're going to learn how to handle conflict like a pro and bring the fire back into your marriage. It's going to be practical and tactical, okay? You're going to get strategies to take away because it's a challenge. So you will be challenged. You'll be pushed. You will have homework. You will be called to action. But what's the reward? It's real change. It's a reignited marriage. It's renewed confidence. It's clear direction. So if you want to deepen your connection and start building the marriage you've always wanted, I want you to sign up today at dateyourwifechallenge.com, okay? Brother, don't let your marriage slip through your fingers. And here's the thing, I'm capping the attendance because I want to make sure that I can serve you as powerfully as possible. So spots are going to be limited, right? And once the tickets are sold, they're done and we close the doors. So go to dateyourwifechallenge.com, grab your ticket now, okay? I'm going to put the link in the show notes below so you have my permission. Pause the episode, pull over if you're driving on the highway, and get the ticket, all right? Okay, now let's get back into the episode. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Grose. Now, Daniel is a friend of mine. We've been connected over the past couple of years over social media, but he's been married to his wife, Rachel, for at least 15 years, and together they're raising 4 boys, and his passion is really in helping men, especially fathers and husbands, step into their calling at home. Now, he's the creator of the Foundations of Fatherhood, which is a program designed to help equip men with the tools to lead their families with strength and with vision, raising resilient young men who will carry that legacy forward. And Daniel's mission is simple, but it's powerful, to show no matter how hard life gets, healing is possible and love can win. Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show with me today, brother.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. I loved it last time we had a conversation, and happy to look forward to it. Maybe more than once a year, Mitchell.
You know what, man? Let's just make this like a biannual thing. We just it's gonna be good.
Dude, that
So
would be awesome.
I was telling just you listeners, I was talking to Daniel before we hit record, and I was like, bro, your podcast, your episode was one of the most downloaded episodes of all of mine. And I think it's for good reason. We shared his story. We talked about his traumatic past, and into his journey into fatherhood. He shared some beautiful, wise kind of tips for young fathers. It was powerful. And so if you haven't heard that yet, go back. I can't remember what episode it is, but it's not, I mean, I only have 60 episodes out so far, or at this point, it might be a little bit more than that, but go back, find it. It was an incredible episode. You'll learn about his past. Daniel's one of these guys that he's wise beyond his years. You're wise like someone who's 300 years old, but I swear you're, how old are you now? You got to be
I'm
40s?
42. Oh man, do I turn 43? I turn 42 in a couple weeks.
Wow. That's good, man.
I'm
That's
old
good.
enough to not know for sure how old I am.
Yeah, well, listen, you're going to love this episode today. It's going to be a powerful conversation about fatherhood, about raising sons, about raising kids, about our role as fathers, about and how to step into their lives. So I just want to ask you a couple quick questions just about your program and all those different things and kind of why you started it. But obviously, you've got this course called the Foundations of Fatherhood. But in your view, what are the non-negotiable foundations that every father must really lay out if he wants to raise sons to become men of character and integrity and in strength?
Our culture, when you think about what we're prepared to handle as adults, it's really mostly just to get a job. Like that's what we're aimed at. We spend most of our day learning how to do that. We go to college, we spend all our money to figure out how are we going to make a living. And so a lot of men are really good at that. And that's loving with your strength. That's physical provision. It's only one aspect of loving with your strength that's not actually even taught all that well. But there's this whole gambit of loving with your heart, with your emotions, and with your mind. So we kind of break a man down and we say, what does it mean to love with your heart, soul, mind, and strength? And we look at your spiritual life, your mindset, kind of your physical capability. And we look at it almost like working out. You look at each muscle and you train that muscle in isolation to find out where your weak spots are. And once you do that as a man, we talk about the integrated man. We pull all these things together. So how do you show up in the fullness of who you need to be so that you're not just good at work, but when your wife needs you to be vulnerable, or your kids need you to be wise and thoughtful, or draw a hard boundary, or you need to know how to stand up for something and lead without being too passive. Man, we break it down and we get into the nitty gritty of your real life.
I love that. Quick question. I was having a conversation with a gentleman and he was asking me about leadership in the home. And actually it was Quentin Hafner from Black Belt Husbands. I don't know if you follow him or not, but I had him on the podcast, and he talks a lot about leadership in the home. And I think a lot of people, it ruffles their feathers when we talk about leadership, because from two different aspects. Sometimes men are like, well, why do I have to be the one who steps up? Why is it that, how is she going to lead? Or, they kind of have this well, why do I have to carry all the weight? But then when it can ruffle the feathers of some women and thinking, well, I don't want some boss, right? What does it mean that he's going to lead me? I'm not some subservient, so when we talk about leading your home and leading your family, how do you define that exactly?
Yeah, so my idea of leadership comes from Jesus. I model it completely after who Christ was. And so I'm just going to jump right in onto that, because the idea that we are servant leaders is 100% what I go towards. So you look at who Jesus was. Now, even if you don't believe in it, I want your listeners to just take this concept and think about what you can pull from this idea that God humbles himself to come down to earth and be a man. And look at his life as a man. I mean, he's washing his disciples' feet. He's being so humble that even when he's being, ridiculed and beaten and tortured, he constantly stays in a perspective of love. Like he knows what I say, whose he is. He knows he's the Father. He continually draws strength from the Father, and he's constantly serving other people, right? But then Scripture says he is the head of the church, and that we love our wives the way Christ loved the church. And when I look at the way Christ loved the church, it's never authoritarian. It's never a tyrant. He's always loving in a way where he is serving. He's inspiring the church. One of my favorite definitions of leadership was by Seth Godin. It says it's the job of a leader to create the conditions in which others can thrive. In the Christian world, it's funny. I got asked one time on my social media, do I believe in a complementarian marriage or egalitarian marriage, which is the idea of do we have separate roles that complement each other, which the husband is the head, right? And the wife is the helpmeet, right? Or are we equal? We're on the same footing. And I was like, well, I personally believe that it's complementarian, that the dad and the father is the head of the household. But in practical day-to-day, like living, it feels very egalitarian because my wife is a source of wisdom. She has things I don't have. And there are no major decisions or things that I do that my wife isn't every bit as involved in as me. So let me give like a really big example of this. When we're creating culture in our home, my wife has a gift that I don't have. She creates a beautiful home. I call her the curator of beauty in our lives. Like you walk around our kitchen, there's these little like vignettes and the way stuff is set up. I could never do that. I would have such a bro kitchen. And that would suck. It would suck for us. It would suck for my kids. It's like, there's the meat, there's the salt, there's the knife. Like y'all go make your stuff. And my wife's created a beautiful home. We have people over at our home all the time, right? So when we talk about creating our home, that doesn't mean I come in and steamroll and I'm like, oh, this is a division for our home and this is what we're doing. She and I create that together. But you know how I lead? I lead the implementation of that. So when my kids are leaving their clothes all around the house, I don't want my wife to be the person that's having to like pull the teeth and get everybody on board and feels like she's alone and isolated and eventually steps into a more masculine and often cold and hardened version of herself to try to pull me and my 4 boys along with her. Like, no, I'm the leader. She had the vision and the talent there, but I'm the one that says, boys, this is the vision your mom and I have for having a good home with some cleanliness, some beauty, and some orderliness. And so I take on as the leader, leading our family in being able to do those things. So it's really this idea of servant leadership. And I have never met a woman, even the most feminist of women, who when they think about being loved in that way, find that kind of leadership as a threat. They feel loved by it. They feel cared for. They feel safe by that. So I need to say this too, in terms of being men of faith. In my coaching, I deal with a lot of men who are like, I want to lead. And I come and try to lead. And my wife argues with me. She challenges me. And I'm like, you know what? That's because your leadership is, this is my opinion. This is what I want to do. And then your wife has something different and you guys are in a conflict now. Your wife isn't called to follow your ambition or your whatever it is that you want for your life. She's submitting to your submission to God. So you're talking to your wife about the vision that God has for your family, and you're bringing that down. And then you guys decide together, hey, this is the call that God has on us. How do we best facilitate that with the combined strengths that we both have? Right? And my wife, I don't want her to trust everything that I do because I'm a flawed man and I'm going to do stupid things. But if we're praying together about it, if we're talking about like her Christian women friends, my Christian men friends, and we're listening to God, then she trusts my leadership on a completely different level. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. No, and I think that's a good distinction. I think that there's a problem with the definition. of leadership in our world today. And we like to pull things out of context, and we like to extrapolate details and, isolate. And at the end of the day, when the definition is understood in its fullness, it makes sense. And I would agree. I've never talked to a woman who wouldn't crave that kind of love, that kind of affection, that kind of support and security in the home. So when it's done well, right? I want to ask you a little bit about, and also thanks for going there. Appreciate that, because not a lot of people have an answer for that. So again, it's awesome. I want to talk a little bit about raising boys, in the world that we're living in today, because I got a young boy. He's 23 months old right now. Probably by the time I'm recording, he'll probably be 2 years old. You got a bunch of boys. And there's been a lot going on in our world lately about, with all the shootings and this conversation about masculinity, this conversation about really kind of returning back to our roots, if you will, or like what it means to be a strong man today, to love your wife, to love your children, to, all those different things. But the reality is raising a boy today, probably looks quite different than what it did just a couple generations ago, but from your perspective, what kind of unique challenges do you think that fathers are facing in the modern world, and how do we equip our sons to stand strong in it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many challenges.
It's a big question.
Yeah, to me, the first challenge there is going to be how separated fathers are from their sons. So that's been more than a generation. That's been the last 100 years where fathers really left the home to go to work. And it is my belief that that is not the way God created families to exist. That for forever, fathers and sons worked together. They worked within community, right? If your father was a carpenter, so were you. You grew up working, so you got to see your father every day. And taking the father away from the home from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. so that he's not in view of his sons. And often his greatest act of love, where he really sacrifices and uses his talents and skills in the workplace, that's not in view of his sons. So they're not getting an image of what does a man look like? Like the father's world, his real world with other men is a mystery to his son, right? So sons don't get to see that. So there's a huge challenge in reclaiming, like, how do I show my sons this when I actually live most of my manhood out of their view? So that is the first big challenge. I would say the second challenge to men, it's not just their work, but now it's their screens, right? Because you can come home and still not be present with your son at all. Screens have a lot of challenges. Just being super frank, if I wanted to look at porn when I was 14 years old, there was some risk involved. I had to sneak into my buddy's house when his dad wasn't home and try to get something out of the closet, go hide and look at it, and then come back. And before anybody's dad found out and not get in trouble, and we had to put some work into it, and it was still very limited what we could see. So we had some natural protection from some of this evil, right? There was only one TV show that was going to give us bad information, like Beavis and Butthead on MTV, and it was on the TV in the living room, right? But now with the screen, your kids can see the most addictive eye candy anytime they want, whether they want to or not, if they have access to this stuff. So it's really crazy the amount of temptation and voices that are coming in. So not only was the father's voice removed in ways that it should never have been, but then screens came in, further removed the father's voice because he's going to be checking his phone way too often if he's not disciplined. And his son is going to go upstairs at 6 o'clock and be like, I'm just going to chill out on my phone. And then so many more voices are coming in. And they're not voices who love your son, who have his best interest at heart. They're voices that want money, they want likes, they want political affiliation. They have an agenda that they want from your child that has nothing to do with your child's well-being. They don't know your child. So it's huge. So there's that. So we're just going to open up the cans of the issues for a second. And I think the third thing is the domestication of men and boys, that we're on all sides sort of fit in to these boxes, right? Boys are supposed to sit still at school for extended periods of time at a day, during a day. And fathers often also have, like, they need to be controlled a little bit. So they go to work, they feel very controlled. Then when they come home, they don't know how to fit at home. They've got their wife's world and their kids' world. They're trying to figure out their place in it. So they never have a place where they're showing their strength, where sort of the wildness of the masculine spirit gets to just be out there. Hence, you have men running to Netflix where they can watch a show where some other man gets to do it and live vicariously, or they're numbing the fact that they can't do it. So, raising a son in a culture that doesn't reward or create space for the hearts of men and boys, that seeks to take fathers away and then fills our life with a lot of other temptations, a lot of other voices. Man, it is just a fight against the family and fathers and sons like we've never ever seen before.
Yeah. Wow. Work, the father's, just in summary, the father's voice is removed more than ever, right? We're not getting that interaction, working together, spending the day together, because masculinity is caught, usually not taught, right? Screens, the father's voice is removed again because we're so separated by screens, whether they go on their screens, you go on your screens, or there are other voices being spoken in, and that our sons are hearing. And then the domestication are the 3 points you brought up, and I think are all valid points, man. I love that. Tell me real quick, what are ways that you personally, in like your life, because I know you're really passionate about this, what are ways that you're fighting back against those three things?
Well, with screens, my youngest is 2, my oldest is 13, and they just don't have access to screens at all. They don't have phones at all. I don't intend to get them phones. My wife and I have debated whether or not we will give them limited access to a phone when they're 16. The debate for us is, do we want them to experience social media within the confines of our home before they leave? Because when they leave the house, they'll be experiencing it for the first time without us being there. So we've talked about that, but at best, it'll be age 16, and they would get a limited exposure that's very controlled when it comes to screens. Even the screen time we do allow at our house is heavily curated. It's You can watch this show. We're not watching screens during the week. We watch it on the weekends, and it'll be Sunday for 2 hours. Like, we put huge boundaries and limits around it. Every now and then, Rachel and I are like, we're really tired and we just need them to be entertained for a minute. We will do that, but we recognize what that is, right? But I don't want to paint people out to be evil if they turn on a show for their kids. But I do want to say, even when you give them screen time, man, so many shows are terrible for them to watch. Just even YouTube shorts. There's all these studies coming out now that just the shortness of it, and how it's affecting our attention span. And I'm like, how are you going to teach them to enjoy good literature, like reading a good story, settling into a book like Lord of the Rings or rather Redfern Grows, if their attention span is to the extent of a YouTube short, let alone like a good movies. Like, we want them to watch like Old Yeller and Swiss Family Robinson, and some kind of movie that we agree with, that's just not noise and conflict and lights and loud sounds. So everything around screens is curated for our kids, as it is for me, right? If I have my phone out, it automatically sends the message to everybody in my family that I'm not 100% available. And because they know, like, dad might check his likes on Instagram. He might get a call from a coaching client, right? Who knows what I'm going to, but it's going to distract me. And then when my kids get in an argument, I'm looking at my phone. My wife is now the first person to be involved. she actually has a little radar in her mind that says, Daniel might be distracted on his phone, so I've got to be the one that handles what's happening in our home right now. And so now she's taking on the emotional responsibility of managing everything because I may or may not be paying attention to what's going on. Because my phone is just out and within reach, and I occasionally grasp it. So boundaries around the phone extend to parents as well as they do kids. So honestly, it's just I don't check my phone from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. if that's the rule for that day. At 9:01, if I want to pick it up and see how many people commented, fine, because I planned on it and I put those boundaries in place. So with the screens, man, huge boundaries are great. For us, habits of the household are huge to reclaim that time. I recently shifted jobs so that I'm home a lot more now, but for my entire life, for most of my life, I worked 40 to 50 hours a week. And that's true of most people. So the time from 5 or 6 p.m. to 9 to 10 p.m. is sacred. So we have rituals and rhythms around this stuff. So you can come home, you can eat at separate times, and you can go off and do your separate things and coexist without being a family at all, right? You're all roommates. Everyone does their own thing. Or you could come home and say, our family culture is that we have dinner together because we believe family is a community. It's where we learn to be servant-hearted. It's where we do good things together, mundane things together. We just spend so much time together that we get a sense of belonging. And our sons and our daughters need to know that they belong so that when they leave the home, they're not in search of a place to belong. Right? So family dinner could be so huge. It can be one of your children cooking with whichever parent is doing the cooking. They're learning a skill. They're spending time with you. Everybody's involved in setting the table. And then we have a family dinner and we sit down and eat. I love it if it's a home cooked meal. If you had to order in pizza, I don't care. If you're sitting down, that's awesome. Sit down together and have intentional conversation. Like, hey, we're not just rushing through this. We're here to be together. So we're going to learn manners. We're going to learn how to pass stuff. We're going to learn how to not take all the macaroni and cheese and leave something for our mom and our little brother. Dude, we had this awesome exercise. I know this is a long rant, but this stuff is huge. Like, we had this awesome exercise because I wanted my kids to learn how to listen, that everyone had to go around and tell a story from their day. And after they were done, everybody else had to ask a question about the story, because kids are really bad about hearing something like, oh, I caught a fish today. And then the next kid will be like, oh, yeah, well, I caught 5 fish the other day. Right? There's like this one-upmanship because kids do that. Right? And I'm like, no, we're going to learn how to speak and tell a story. And then we're going to learn how to listen so well that we can ask interesting questions about the story. And then we're going to take turns doing that. It's like this awesome way to build family culture about listening. And then after dinner's over, we take our dishes in and then we all participate in family chores, right? So the time that was taken away when I was gone, I now have this really cool moment in just a couple hours of instilling all these values with my kids.
You know, I was reading a study done a little while ago about the effect of shorts and these quick hits, you know, on children. And what the result of the study was saying was, it's actually, you might think that putting a kid in front of a long movie is more dangerous than, say, 10 minutes of short videos. But what they're saying now is, in fact, it's actually better for you and your child if you sit them down and watch in a full-length movie and sit with them and actually talk with them through it and help them, because it teaches them to pay attention for longer than the 10 minutes, the full hour and a half, but also teaching them concepts and extracting things as the movie goes on. And it can become this sort of bonding time together where you're learning things and applying it, versus putting them on the couch to watch it alone, or even worse, putting them on the couch and having them scroll 30-second videos. And the damage is actually in the short bursts of videos. That's what neurologists are discovering now, is that's really what's causing the challenge, is this constant hit, right? And so I was like, wow, I would have never assumed that it actually makes more sense to watch a full length movie and sit with them and process through them than to just put them on the couch and just, maybe if it's just 10 minutes of reels or whatever. And I think that's so interesting because it affects, circling back to this idea of conversation too, because we're seeing that, the art of conversation is getting lost. Kids, teenagers today don't even know how to carry on a conversation. And the moment it dies, it's, well, boom, I'm just going to grab my phone. So this concept of conversational threading, giving someone something to catch on to, and then you catching on to the last phrase they said, things like that. The art of conversation is being lost, and it's kind of sad, and what I see is the things that you're doing in your family are actively, pushing back and fighting against that.
Yeah, man, I want to raise, again, I want to raise sons who know how to love well, and to give someone your attention and listen and be present is now a skill that has to be learned. And I want my sons to be able to offer that. Almost the greatest bit of dignity you can give to somebody else is to say, like, I'm here for whatever it is you have to say. Like, I'm here for it. Man, that's an awesome thing to be able to do. And if you don't have the mental wherewithal to be able to offer that to somebody, like, that's just such a sad thing. And it limits your ability to show up as a loving, kind person in this world.
Yeah, 100%. Did you want to talk a little bit about that domestication, or you don't have to if you don't want? We can move on to the next question.
I mean, for us, that was, we started homeschooling for that very reason. So that my boys, when they're in, it's kind of first to third grade, they only have about an hour and a half of school. Up to my son who's in seventh grade, he does about 2.5 hours of school a day. And then the rest of the day, they're able to play. Able to play and able to work. Like, I want my kids to work themselves into exhaustion. They're kind of like a hunting dog. If you have a hunting dog and you don't ever take that dog out to run him or her, like, they will bark all the time. They get stressed out. They run in circles. They tear stuff up and they go crazy. But if you will let them just take off into the woods and chase squirrels, like, they're so happy, and they'll come home at the end of the night and they'll just lay down, and you can see that contentment. Young boys are very similar to that. Like, they need to run their energy out. And boys learn through play. Like, they learn through physically experiencing things, like, more than they do through sitting and listening to a lecture. And I preach to my kids. I teach my kids all the time. Like, they probably wish I lectured less than I do. But I know that they're going to learn more from going out and doing something than they are from me talking about it at all. Because boys, especially, girls too, but I think boys specifically are more tactile learners than girls are. So you could see it anytime. My son and I were talking about this just the other day. He was like, you get a bunch of girls together, they tend to sit around, like, they'll talk, they will do something that's more cerebral to connect with each other. But that same group, that age group of boys, they're like age 10 or 11 years old, like, they're going to be dogpiling, they're going to be wrestling, they're going to be making farting noises with each other, and they're going to be doing something like that because that's how they're meant to be. So we just create spaces for them to be able to do that. And that's huge. There's a lot of spaces where I have to say, calm down, like at church. I'm like, dude, you can't climb on the pews at church. Like, the pastor is praying, sit down. And that's fine. As long as later that day, I'm like, go nuts. We're going outside to play. You can wrestle with dad. I'm not going to tell you to be quiet. Get out there and have at it.
I love that. I love that, man. And that's a great segue to another question I wanted to ask you about, just this difference of, daughters and sons, because, and I know you've talked about the differences between fathering sons and fathering daughters, but what do you see as key distinctions, right, between the two, and how should fathers adjust their approach to give each of them what they need most from us? Because I think it's fair to say that they're different, but what are the differences, and how do we adjust our approach?
All right, Mitchell, I'm going to tell you that recently in my life, I have found that just stating your controversial belief, even if it is hard for some people, that at least helps them to question and sharpen their own beliefs. So I constantly get in trouble on my own social media page for saying that boys and girls are different, fundamentally different, that gender matters and that God made each sex different. The thing is, I don't care if you're a Christian or not, even if you believe that no God and that we evolved completely from, billions of years ago, the wiring is still different. And I think that's evident in their spirits. And I think boys and girls are a really good way to learn about masculine and feminine spirits because they've been controlled less and it shows up a little more authentically. But they have different spirits. Understanding the hearts and the needs of a masculine soul versus a feminine soul, or that masculine spirit versus the feminine spirit, changes the way that you parent. It doesn't always change the activity necessarily. It changes what it calls out to in the child, right? So I had a post where I talked about things that boys should do recently. And I did get a lot of feedback of like, girls can do this too. And I couldn't believe like how I was getting raked over the coals. I was like, I didn't say girls can't do it. But when a boy does it, I'm calling out to the protector, provider spirit within that boy because he's going to have different expectations placed on him when he grows up than a girl is, right? He's going to carry different weights. Society is going to preach different messages to him. There's a huge message about toxic masculinity, but I have never heard anyone talk about toxic femininity. That's not a message that girls really have to come up against, right? Because we kind of believe and we see the goodness of women in the feminine spirit. But with men, because their aggression and their ability to do that can be really harmful, we're like, oh, we've got to take that, figure out a way to crush it. So we're going to call it toxic. Instead of figuring out how do we take what that is inside of boys, that's their identity, and channel it towards something positive. So if you're not speaking to them about the things that they do with that in mind, you don't connect it to their spirit and soul, right? Are you tracking with it? Is that all making sense? Right. So when I tell my boys to go lock the door at night, if I tell them, hey, go lock the door at night, it's because I want them to start thinking about the protection of their home, of having a responsibility that has an identity with it, that I'm a man, that I take care of stuff, that safety is important, and that I'm capable of doing these kinds of things. If I ask my daughter to do it, I'm asking her to do a helpful chore, but I don't want my daughter thinking about the responsibility of the safety of other people, right? My son's not responsible for that safety, but I want to start putting it in his brain now. So when you give a son a task or a chore versus when you give it to a daughter, it may be the same thing, but I want to connect that activity to their identity, to the part of their soul that it aligns with, right? So if I ask my son to go help his mom carry in groceries, I'm not just giving him something he needs to do as like a task or a chore. I'm wanting him to start to learn that, hey, like when mom needs help and it's something that's like heavy and hard to carry, we go do that because that's part of physical provision. That's part of providing for somebody. And I want them to start practicing and connecting their actions with the concept of being a protector and a provider, right? When my kids backtalk their mom, when she's asking them to do a chore, I will tell them, like, of course you can't backtalk your mom, but when I'm really talking to them about why do we not do that, I talk about loving their mother. And I'm like, guys, we don't want to create a culture in our home where every time mom needs you to do something, she has to fight with you. She has to pull you along. I'm like, is that the kind of man we want to be? Right. So I start connecting these little things that we do with this huge why that calls out to their spirit of wanting to be, they're young boys. They want to be a hero. Right. So if you ask a 5-year-old boy about his parents, a 5-year-old wants to marry his mom and he wants to be like his dad. Right. So the things that they like about a father is he's strong, is that he cares about things, is that he's capable. I want to start bringing them into that at whatever age level they're in, whatever they're capable of. With daughters, you might have them do all the same things, but you're going to say, what calls out to their feminine spirit? So when I had that post about things that boys should do or that moms should let boys do, because I constantly get asked by moms, what can I do to help my sons become good men, especially when dad's not around? My list was of, gender stereotypical tasks like mowing the lawn. I'm like, that's because boys want to do physical things and it calls out to them. And they were like, well, what can girls do? Do they just need to do laundry and do the dishes? And I'm like, no, you've missed it. It's not about like, what are the things that they should do or the typical roles. If you want to call out something to a girl's heart and you want to do the reverse, then you ask a dad, what should you be doing to call out to the feminine spirit of your daughter, right? So if your daughter's feminine spirit is she wants to be beautiful, she wants to be seen, also that she wants to know that she's capable too, it's going to be a completely different thing that you do to try to, to call that out and to encourage that in her and to sort of bring it forth, right? So when we look at rites of passage, I've done some research on like different Indian tribes' rites of passage, and it's really, really cool. So it was the Navajo Indian tribe. They do a different rite of passage for men than they do for women. And the one that they do for women, it's women who put it on. It is a big deal. They spend a lot of money. They spend years preparing for this thing. But in their culture, they actually want to give their young girls the skills to be able to provide for the physical well-being of a family, because that is what their tribe has always needed, and they want her to have that. But for the young boys, it's all centered around the spiritual leadership of the home, right? Which I thought was really cool. I'm like, we do nothing hardly in American culture to bring the boys into the spiritual leadership of the home and call them into that. There's a lot of other cool things that I'm doing with my own son for his rite of passage. But what was cool is that they recognized things that resided in the spirits of their young girls and spirits of their young men. And they call to those things when they have their rite of passage ceremonies. So I think that's really important because you're not raising generic people. They're common stuff. You want to have good people. You want your sons and your daughters to be generous, to have gratitude, right? But then there's unique things about their masculine and feminine spirit that also need to be called out to.
Yeah. Wow. I want you to join the Date Your Wife Challenge on November 3rd, okay? 3 weeks from today, the launch of this episode. It's going to be such a powerful week together. You are going to walk away with a step-by-step plan to reignite the spark in your marriage. You're going to get more passion, more intimacy, more connection without having to do therapy or talk about your feelings, right? You're going to get tactical tools and plans to communicate effectively without blow-ups or shutdowns. You're going to capture daily wins that help build momentum and confidence in yourself as a husband. And lastly, my favorite part is you're going to be surrounded by a brotherhood of like-minded men who understand your struggles and are walking the same road to success with you. So let's build the marriage you've always wanted, okay? So head over to dateyourwifechallenge.com or hit the link in the show notes below. I love that, man. And thank you for sharing a little bit about from your perspective and some of the things you're doing with your boys as well. Now, let's take the focus off of boys and girls and let's talk about now when those boys and girls become women and men and fathers and mothers, okay? Because in parenting, we know, I think you and I would both agree that the father and the mother both carry irreplaceable roles, right? So from your experience, how do the father's role and the mother's role differ, right? Where do they overlap? And what happens when either role is missing? And I know it's a big question, and I know you're going to have a lot to share on it, but hit us with it.
Yeah, that is a big question. So their roles change throughout time as it goes along. And it's different with boys and girls. And honestly, it's different with each child, right? Parenting always requires some amount of wisdom and some amount of discernment to know. There's no specific, like, this is steps 1, 2, 3 of how you do it. But mothers naturally are going to be more capable of being soft and being nurturing. right? So I say that, and I'm not giving any guy permission to get off the hook about being soft or nurturing. Dude, I sleep with my kids like, well, sorry, when they're younger, the ones that are 6 months and two, like I do the midnight feedings. I'm so sweet to them and nurturing, right? But I will never be as nurturing as my wife, just on the sheer fact that like her voice is sweeter. She literally produces milk from her body. Her body is extremely soft. She had the most nurturing environment known to man in her womb where she grew this child. There is an element of softness and nurture and beauty that a husband is not going to be able to compete with,
Mm-hmm.
right? So trying to act like you can do it on the same level is just shortchanging your children, right? And it's not really acknowledging the unique strengths and gifts that you have as husband and wife. And it's not acknowledging your interdependence that God made you to have on each other, right? It's not codependence. It's not independence. It's interdependence. And that's the beauty where husbands and wives get drawn into community, right? That's why marriage is so important. That's why it's two become one and they're equally yoked, because your family needs both of those things. So when children are younger, they are going to need what the mother has to offer more directly than what they're going to need from a father. So that's different, but it's ages 0 to 3. Which is interesting. I talk to men all the time and they're like, I don't really know what to do. Like it's sort of mom and baby, it's their world. I'm like, guys, your role for that age is huge though. One, you do need to be soft and comforting with that baby. And hopefully they love doing that, right? But two, she needs sort of this protective bubble of time to just be with that baby, right? She's using something like 30% of her calories just to produce milk. She's going to be more tired. She's got this little child clinging to her all the time. And I don't want my wife stressed out about the other 2 or 3 kids or all the other stuff that she used to do when she's got this huge new 24/7 responsibility on her. So I'm like, men, for this truncated period of time, you have got to go all in on responsibilities that used to be shared between you and your wife, but she's got a new thing. And so now you have to step in and take over a lot of the stuff that she may used to have done, right? So if she used to pack the lunches, dude, you're packing the lunches. So she doesn't have to worry about that. If she was the primary cooker, dude, you better learn how to cook 5 meals and get that stuff down because she's got to be with the baby, right? So your role as protector and provider is in creating this emotional safe space for her to be able to focus on this baby, right? And of course she's going to still help with the house because she's still got mom wiring around her other children. But so your roles are kind of different as children are younger, right? When you get to that age 3 to around age 8, there's a lot of overlap. Both parents are equally bigger, older, and kind of carry a lot of authority over children just because of who they are, right? So they're both involved, but it looks a little bit different. And there's a lot of science about this now that, well, so when a man wrestles with his son, both of them, or with his kids too, with his daughters too, they're going to produce more oxytocin and have a stronger bond based on physical, rowdy, rough activity. And your kids need to have that bond with you, right? And dude, you will feel it. I promise you. Like I get giddy sometimes wrestling with my kids in a way that I really need it. I'm like, why am I just so happy right now wrestling with them? Just because my oxytocin is on fire, right? My wife will actually wrestle with them too when they're 5, but it's not the same, right? She's going to get a similar amount of oxytocin when they're like, Mom, can we read a story? And my 5-year-old son cuddles up next to her, wants to be super sweet, give her kisses, and they read a book together, right? I also read books and give my son kisses, but it's just scientifically different. Like my wife is going to get, and my children are going to get more oxytocin boost doing that with their mother than they're going to with their father, right? So you're both very involved. You're both doing similar activities, but your kids respond to each of you differently. So you want to lean into those things in a way that helps you and your children bond in these really cool ways. I always say, like, I know this idea, well, I would say a deception that's mother and fathers are equally capable. I know you're equally capable of wrestling or reading stories or overseeing chores and doing homework. It's not about that. It's about the connection to your children. Your children's heart and soul, their hormones, their oxytocin level, and the way they look at you has nothing to do with what culture tells you is equal gender roles. They're a lot more pure, and their bodies respond the way their bodies respond. Whether you believe, again, that God created them, or it's a product of the wiring of evolution, or maybe you believe in both, it's just the case. Um, but I feel like my kids have very similar relationships from ages 3 to 8. Like they go fishing with mom and they go fishing with dad, right? And they love it with both of us. Um, but somewhere around age 8, I think there's a huge part of the relationship that, especially with young boys, that needs to shift over to a father. A boy at that age is going to start trying to figure out, who am I? And I call it the challenger phase. And so he quits taking your word for it and starts to want to be like, do I actually believe what mom and dad say? And they want to start challenging you. And this is really important, and it's good because before, their identity was wrapped up in what you said, who you were, spending time with you. They want to hear stories from your childhood. They want to just go to Lowe's with you just to sit next to you in the car on the way there because their whole identity is around belonging to you. But at some point, you want your children to develop a separate identity, their own identity. And that comes with challenging you. And a lot of times it feels like disrespect. And it feels like them going their own way. So they will start to challenge. And it's at that point where I feel like the dad has a new role. That role is he is more equipped emotionally and wired to be able to accept challenges from children in a way that a mother should not have to,
Mm.
right? So a mother is going to have to do it because she's in the home. And sometimes the dad's not there. But if she is the dominant person who's, when a child is being disrespectful or when a child's like, why are you telling me that I have to share with my brother? He should have to share with me. And she's the one breaking up fights. And they start to challenge what you say is right and wrong. A father is built to be able to handle that, right? A mother can turn into a person who handles that. But almost every time you see that in a woman, it brings her to a place where she becomes someone she doesn't want to be, where her husband doesn't want her to have to be. She's harder. She's more cold. She loses herself. That free spirit, that person who is curious and graceful and soft and nurturing, it becomes less because she's in a state of stress, because she knows she has to deal with all the stuff because she's got a passive husband, right? Whereas men are made for this, okay? It's the same thing when you think about men going into combat. Like men are made to be able to do this, not only do it, but to be able to do it without having to go into tyrant mode, right? I can handle my son any kind of disrespect or yelling that he gives me, not feel challenged, not have my nervous system sit into fight or flight, and just to be like, son, I love you. We're not going to go down this road where you challenge or disrespect me or your mom. Um, but I don't feel threatened by that. And I'm actually excited. Like I get excited to intercept my children's conflict because like it's a discipleship moment. Every time they do that, it's not a challenge to me as their father in the same way it is to their mother. It's a moment to teach. It's a moment for discipleship. And I love that. It goes the same for daughters too. If you have 4 daughters and they're constantly challenging and fighting the mother, and she feels like I always have to be in the combative state with my children and hold boundaries, it still does something to her. It's still the father's role to really be the one um, to help be the boundary when a child is trying to find their own identity, right? So it's a very nuanced, very complicated thing. Like there's books about this, but so if I give you a taste of what that shift is like there's the summary of it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned books because that is one of the last questions I wanted to ask you, man. Is I know you're a voracious reader. You're obviously very passionate about this. You obviously have a lot of knowledge and wisdom around this topic. And so for any men, I mean, 90% of my listeners are, fathers who are 25 to 55 years old, have young kids in the house, they're professionals, working professionals, in positions of leadership, all those different things. So, but there's a lot of questions, man, around fatherhood, a lot of questions around how to raise boys, how to raise girls, all these questions we've talked about. And so in your experience in all the reading you've done over the years, what are like maybe 2 to 3 books that you think are like absolute staples for young dads to be reading right now in their young fatherhood journey?
So this is kind of an oldie but goodie, but if you haven't read it, you've got to read Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. I probably should put that as a bonus book because I think so many people know about it, but it's still just foundational text. You need to read that book. If you're a young dad, The Intentional Father by John Tyson is non-negotiable. Like when you finish listening to this podcast, if you have not read that book, go to Amazon and get that book right now. It's a Christian book, so it's very faith-based, but it's a book on how to disciple your sons. My fatherhood coaching program, I got a lot of inspiration from John Tyson's book. So you have to read that book. Just in terms of parenting, the book, The Whole Brain Child, is foundational reading for every parent, husbands and wives. You need to read The Whole Brain Child. It's not a faith-based book, but I fold all of it into my faith. And I love it. Scripture says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Talks about the relationship with your Holy Spirit producing, gentleness, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, right? And The Whole Brain Child, I feel like they talk about the neuroscience of the work of the Holy Spirit. It's super cool, but they'll talk about neurons that fire together, wire together, and retraining the way you respond, nervous system regulation. And when you read how your children's nervous system works and learn how your nervous system works when your kids do something that gets on your nerves and your first inclination is to yell at them, I feel like you're reading about the neural process of, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So when you take really good practical science and skills and you combine them with faith in the Holy Spirit, dude, that is so powerful. So I would say The Whole Brain Child, if you read those 3 books as a man and you really absorb the information there, gosh, that would be incredible.
Wild at Heart, The Intentional Father, and The Whole Brain Child.
Yep.
All right, dude, I love it. You've given us a masterclass, man. This has been a fantastic conversation, brother. This is always a pleasure. I mean, I still bring up points that you shared in our first episode together, and I still have friends of mine who like, oh, you got to get that guy back, that Daniel guy. What was his name? And so I just love our talks, man. I love our talks. So I want to support you the best way I can. So tell our listeners, man, where can they find you online, and how can we come alongside you? How can we support you?
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. So my Instagram page is honest_fatherhood. If you go on Instagram, you're looking for Honest Fatherhood, you will see my content and stuff pop up. On Facebook, it's just my name, Daniel Grose, because it was my original Facebook page. I started throwing my Instagram stuff up there. But the biggest thing I do so there's free content all over Instagram. I put podcasts up there all the time. I'll put this one up there for a while too, to give people some free stuff to go a little bit deeper. But I do this for a living now. Like, I'm a fatherhood coach because it's my passion and my mission to help men love with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and who feel unsure of what to do. I'm like, let's figure that out so that you can lead with confidence, and be intentional about the way you lead your family and disciple your sons. I offer my Foundations of Fatherhood program. It is a 10-week program. I run it in group cohorts. So sometimes it's a group, 4 to 5 guys, and we go through it together. We have a group phone call. I love those, man, hearing the guys get to know each other and sharing their struggles. It's really cool. I also offer it as a one-on-one program which is especially good if guys are like, I've got some serious stuff and I need to really unravel some marital issues, some deep things with my son, which is cool because there's one-on-one calls involved in that. So that's really neat. And then I'm about to do a new thing coming up in October about building family culture. So it's a shorter program. It's just 5 weeks. Husbands and wives could both do it. Anyone in the family could do it. But similar, there's 5 weeks of content. Video content comes out. There's a workbook that comes with it. And each week there's going to be a Zoom call that'll have about a 30-minute lecture. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about will be a part of that. And then there's some Q&A each week on that. But, I love fathers, but there's so much of it that the mother also needs to be brought into. And so I wanted to find a way to speak to families together. So this building family culture thing will be coming up. But they need to go to the Instagram page. These links are in my bio. Whenever I'm running a new group or taking new clients, I usually throw it up there. But yeah, they can always email me or find me in those ways. So yeah, man, that's it.
Love it, dude. Well, I'm going to put all those links in the show notes below. So if you're listening today and this has resonated with you, follow him on Instagram, check out his stuff, and check out the links that I'll post it all to what he was just discussing, the Foundations of Fatherhood and all those other things. Listen, Daniel, thank you so much for your time, man. This has been a pleasure. This has been an honor. And you've just provided so much value to our listeners today.
Thanks for having me, man. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into the Dad Nation podcast today. Listen, if today's conversation challenged you, if it encouraged you or helped you level up in any area of your life, would you do me a favor? Take 60 seconds to rate and review the show on whatever platform you're listening on. This helps us reach more men who need to hear this message. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the Dad Nation YouTube channel, where you're going to find full episodes, clips, and exclusive content designed to help you win at home just like you do at work. All right, remember, your family does not need perfection. They need your presence. Your leadership matters. So keep showing up, keep leveling up, and never forget, when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. We'll see you next time.